Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Bible Lands and Customs. Last week, we discussed a rather brief lesson talking about the different um, protocols and the different formats for eating, the different way they ate. We talked about how they said grace prior to and after eating a meal. We also talked about how instead of forks, knives, and spoons, they used the bread to eat with. We also talked about the importance of washing of hands. They washed their hands before they ate because they all shared the communal plate or dish. And then also after a meal was important for them to wash their hands. Also, our homework last week was kind of a inspiration that I had regarding Filipino dishes because I didn't recall the lessons that I had been taught previously in regards to how to make adobo and menudo. And I need to practice those so that when I get back there in January, I will be a professional once again. And so I appreciate everyone who was able to submit your favorite recipe for that. And I was surprised really to learn that many of you prefer the pork in your dishes, which generally I've only ever used chicken. So I am excited to try pork with that. I do like to eat pork and my family does also. So we cannot wait to have an opportunity to try that. And I appreciate again everyone submitting your recipes, and I will be sure and let you guys know as soon as I'm able to try that. We had a little bit of a busy week and the week got away from me before I was able to do anything. So hopefully this week I'll get an opportunity. So tonight we're still talking about eating. We are on chapter 6, page 23 in your notebooks. And this time we're talking about special suppers and banquets or special feasts or meals. Now, this would be like things that happened like at weddings, birthdays, or other special events. And typically in the Jewish time frame here, most of the meals were very simple, which we've discussed before, very average, nothing too fancy. But the feasts and banquets, or these special dinners, meals were much more elaborate. There was a lot more preparation that was involved, more sumptuous foods, more decadent, probably more expensive meats were eaten during these specific occasions. So these events were definitely much more expensive and elaborate in preparation. If you look there on page 23 there, the banquet invitations. Now, this was something interesting I was not aware of. So in some parts of this land, the custom was a double invitation. And what that means is basically sometime before the feast was to be served, there would be an invitation that would go out. Hey, we're going to have food. There's a party coming up. And we want, you're invited. We want you to come. And then when the appointed time came near, when the food or the event was actually ready to occur, a servant would then come again and announce that, hey, now it's time. Everything's ready. Let's go eat, let's go party, let's go have a good time together. Now, there are several examples of this in the Bible. You can see there, Ahasuerus and Haman were invited by Esther to a feast. And then when it was ready, the king's chamberlains went to get Haman in Esther 5:8 and 6:14. Another example was the parable of the wedding of the king's son. The kingdom of heaven is likened to a certain king which made a marriage for his son and sent forth his servants to call them that were bidden to the wedding. Matthew 22:1 and 2. And then again, the parable of the great supper had this double invitation. A certain man made a great supper and bade many. He sent his servant at supper time to say to them that they were bidden, come, for all things are now ready. And that is Luke 14, 16, and 17. So a double invitation was, hey, we're having a party. You're invited. We want you to come. And then again, you would receive a second invitation. Everything's ready. It's time for you to come. And so that's kind of an interesting thing. The Lord tells us in the Bible, hey, make ready the way of the Lord, prepare ye the way of the harvest. So he's telling us, hey, we got to get ready. It's time to make preparations for my return. And then once he comes, what are we going to hear? We're going to hear that trumpet sounding. That's going to be that second invitation that, hey, things are ready. It's time for you to come home. So really cool parallel there regarding the double invitation of a feast and a banquet, but also the returning of God. Next, this is super interesting too, and something that I was not aware of before studying this lesson, the compelling of guests to attend. So we've heard this scripture before, found in Luke 14:23. And the Lord said unto the servant, Go into the highway and hedges, and compel them to come in, that my house may be filled. Now, I always understood that to mean speaking about the kingdom, or speaking about, the synagogue, or a place where they were gathered together, so that everyone could hear the good word, the gospel. But this wasn't necessarily referring to that. He was talking about his house as a time and an opportunity for them to feast together. He wanted his house to be full so that there would be many that were eating together, fellowshipping together. And so he was saying, hey, get everybody you can, compel them, do whatever it takes to get them to come and eat with you. Now, apparently the custom was that it was kind of like playing hard to get it, I guess, maybe. So one would be invited, somebody would come up, hey, we're having a dinner, we want you to come. And it was expected for you to resist that invitation, just like politely resist, oh, no, maybe I'm not able to make it, or, maybe that's not a good time for me. But knowing that in your heart that you have already decided that you would accept the invitation. So the one invited must not at first accept, but is expected rather to reject the invitation, and then he must be urged to accept. And I guess perhaps it was a way to show how badly you as the invitee wanted that person to come. No, we really want you to be there. It's so important that you come. We haven't been able to spend time together. Come on, let's go eat. Let's fellowship. Let's have this good time. And so maybe it was an opportunity to show how important or how vital it was for that person to come and be with you and have fellowship with you. So he must be allowed, the one inviting, the privilege. It was a privilege to be able to compel him to accept that invitation. That Lydia, when she extended this invitation to Paul, his companions must have finally accepted her hospitality. If you've judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come into my house and abide there. And she constrained us. Then it also, when one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to a meal, the Savior did not at first accept the invitation, although he did go finally. Now one of the Pharisees insisted that he take a meal with him in Luke 7:36. And all of this was in keeping with that custom and that tradition of, you're invited, but it's really preferred that you be compelled, that you be drawn in. No, we really want you to be there. It's really important that you come. Please come to my house. They were compelling them, not necessarily in a sense that, they were begging them, but it was an opportunity for them to show just how important it was for that person to be there, to be invited to that meal or to that gathering together. Now, moving along, why exclusion from a feast was considered to be so terrible. Now, if you're having a big party, of course, you all want to be invited. You all want to have an opportunity to be together, and whatever's going on, you want to be a part of it. However, maybe you were not invited. You were excluded from the party, and this is why it was so bad. So these banquets were usually held at night in rooms which were brightly lit, and anybody who was excluded from the feast was said to be cast out of the lighted room into the outer darkness of the night. So in the teachings of Jesus, such exclusion is likened unto the day of judgment. You can read there in that paragraph, the children of the kingdom shall be cast out into utter darkness. Matthew 8:12. Bind him hand and foot and take him away and cast him into outer darkness. Matthew 22:13. And cast ye the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Matthew 25:30. That expression, outer darkness, takes on a new meaning when it's realized what a dread it was for them for that darkness of night. They didn't want to be in the night. Now, at that time, if you'll remember from previous lessons, we talked about the lamp in the home was usually kept burning all night long. It was an opportunity for them to keep a vigil so that they could see, each other in the dark. They had animals that lived there in the house, and so it was a measure of safety. But also, if there was a traveler that was passing by, if they saw the light in the house, they recognized it as a sign of life. Hey, there's somebody there. If that person was traveling and they needed a place to stay, or they had an opportunity to, they needed to be fed or whatever it was, they knew that the sign of the light in the house was an opportunity for them to be taken care of and be brought in. And because of the fear of the darkness, the Savior could have chosen no more appropriate words than outer darkness to represent the future punishment of the unrighteous. I don't want to be cast in the outer darkness. I'm a little bit afraid of the dark anyway. I certainly don't want to be left out of any kind of celebration or gathering when we are all called up to be in heaven, and I don't want to be part of the outer darkness. So it was a fearful phrase because of their fear of the darkness. And if you'll remember the lessons that we had previously about the light. A light was left on, again, to show that life was in the house. Now, the posture while eating, I know we discussed this last week in chapter 5, but there was also another position that people in this day like to eat in, and it was a little unusual. I don't know that I've ever actually eaten in this position before, possibly maybe when I was sick at some point, but I can't imagine just having a meal like this. But it was observed that in ordinary occasions, everybody used to sit, like we discussed, on the ground. They would sit, eating off of a mat or maybe a low stool or table. But in the king's circle, or if you were having a feast of sometimes, they were sometimes seated. And there was also opportunity, the prophet Amos describes it as the stretching themselves upon their couches. So by the time of Jesus, the Roman custom of reclining on couches at supper had been adopted in some of the Jewish circles. The Roman table and couches combined was called a triclinium. If you look there in the picture there in the middle of the page, you can see there's like 3 tables that are put together. There's like a cushion on each side, each of those 3 sides, and then the middle part was left open, and this was left that way so that a servant could easily access all the sides of the table and be able to serve all of the guests and have access to them in order to help them. So the 3 couches were located on the 3 sides of the square, and the guests would lay in a way so that they would recline their body. The upper part, they would rest on their left arm, their head was raised, they had a cushion at their back, and they would stretch out the lower part of their body. Their legs would be stretched out. Now, the head of the second guest was opposite the chest of the first guest, so that they were like close together. And the reason they would do that is so that they would be able to speak in secret or to lean upon the breast, as we've heard, like with John and Jesus at the Last Supper. He leaned against it was so that there was a closeness, a way to have a private conversation that no one else at the table could be privy to, that there could be maybe more sensitive information that was shared, or anything else that you didn't want to publicly be let known by everyone else. So, and in this is, as an example of this, is in several different places. The Apostle John, like I mentioned, asked Jesus a question while in this position at the supper, John 13, 23 through 25. The rich man and Lazarus, when Jesus said that the beggar died and was carried by the angel into Abraham's bosom, he doubtless meant to imply that he was reclining at a heavenly table next to Abraham where he could lean upon his chest. And then it's also clear in the light of Christ's description of that heavenly feast, many shall come from the east and the west and shall recline with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. This position of reclining at the table could also explain how the woman was able to come behind Jesus and take his feet and wash his feet because he was reclining there. So there were private conversations that could happen. It was a way also that the people that were dining could be waited on and cared for in not only with their meal, but they were also ministered to as the women would wash the feet, like the woman washed the feet of Jesus. Now, the places of honor at a table. Now, I'm not sure exactly the Filipino custom, but here in the U.S., the head of the table, or I don't know if it's necessarily the left or the right, but usually there's a chair set at one far end of the table, and that's considered the head of the table. And usually that's considered the place of honor. Usually the father of the home will sit there, the oldest member, if there's a grandparent or elder that's there, anyone like that, someone that you give honor to or respect, they would be the one to sit at the head of the table. And this is interesting. Here it's talking about the Pharisees were invited to a banquet, and they were very covetous. Remember the Pharisees, they thought very well of themselves, and they wanted to have the high places or the distinction at the table. And Jesus was upset by this. He condemned them for this proud spirit. And he said they love the chief place at feasts. And so when Jesus said when a guest was at a meal in a Pharisee's house, he gave the guests a parable because he noticed how much they desired to have this lofty place of honor at the table. And this is the parable that he was given here. This is a translation of Luke's Gospel from Luke 14, 8 through 10. When you're invited by anyone to a wedding feast, do not recline in the post of honor, lest one more honored than you be invited by him, unless the man who invited you both come and say to you, make room for this man, and then you will begin with shame to take and keep the last place. But when you are invited, go and recline in the last place, so that when the man who has invited you comes, he will say to you, friend, come up much higher. Then you will have honor in the presence of all your fellow guests. So basically what this is saying, be humble. Don't just assume a position of honor unless it's bestowed upon you or it's extended to you. Allow the one who has invited you to give you the honor. Don't just assume that, well, I'm here, I've been invited, so surely I deserve the best place. But allow your recognition, your honor, that respect to be given to you by someone else. Don't just assume that because you are who you are, that you deserve that. Now, I know Filipinos in general have a very humble and contrite spirit, so that's not necessarily something that you would struggle with. But just remember that, anytime you're invited to someone's home, yes, it's an honor. Yes, you should be respected. You should be treated with special care and all of that. I'm not denying that. That's certainly something that we should all do. We should all treat those that we invite with the utmost respect. But don't just assume that that's going to happen to you. Be humble. Let someone else have opportunity to give you honor and to put you in that higher place. Now, in many of the homes, one room, now we've discussed this before, one room was a higher floor, and in this room, the guest of honor was assigned these places, and those of less honor slept on a lower floor or level. Remember, again, this is where the family would sleep, sometimes where the servants maybe would sleep, and also where the animals would stay when they had a home that had the animals in the house. um, so a place of special honor would be on the right-hand side of the host, and the next highest place on his left. Remember, James and John asked for such positions in Christ's kingdom in Mark 10:35 through 37. But Jesus advised guests to take the last place. Now, where was this place located? The last place is the lower level and nearest the door. The guest who would take this humble place might be invited by the master of the house to take a place on a higher plane and farther from the door. When we humble ourselves and we don't immediately just assume a place of honor, we allow opportunity for the space of honor or the gift of honor to be given to us. If you don't just naturally assume it, but you allow someone else give the honor, how much more meaningful will that be when you know that that person loves you, appreciates you, respects you? You allow him or her to give you that opportunity to be respected, to have that place of honor. Don't just assume it. Let them have the honor of honoring you. The food and entertainment at banquets. Now, the prophet Amos, he wasn't big on fancy luxuries and sinful excesses, but nevertheless, he did give a description of eating, drinking, and other customs during a banquet. And this is how he described it. And stretch themselves upon their couches, and eat the lambs out of the flock, and the calves out of the midst of the stall. They chant the sound of the viol, and invent themselves instruments of music. Like David, that drink wine in bowls, and anoint themselves with the chief ointments. So the meat that was eaten at these supper included the best lambs from the flocks, and also calves that had been stall-fed. These were the most prized, the most choice meats, the most choice animals. This was what they would serve at banquet time. Now, the drinking of the wine at the feast was considered an important feature. They would play string instruments. The guest would use costly ointments so that it smelled very nice in there. I imagine some of those people living in some of those less rural or, more country type domiciles is probably not necessarily pleasant smelling, but they would wear perfumes and oils and stuff to make it smell more aromatic. Dancing was also part of the entertainment at these feasts, and for instance, when the prodigal son returned home, his father celebrated with the feast. There was music and dancing. Dancing was a social diversion of the Hebrew women and girls, especially when they made merry. Men sometimes also danced. As we remember, David danced when the ark was brought to Jerusalem. But more often than not, it was the women who were the ones that were doing the dancing. And there is no scriptural record that the Jewish men and women danced together. So it was something that they did separately, within their own sex there. So just as a way to celebrate and to entertain one another, to entertain themselves, to way to show that how happy they were. Now, the dancing of the daughter of Herodias in Matthew 14:6, this is another passage of scripture where it talks about dancing in the Bible. Remember, she danced very sensually at the banquet. She was trying to be seductive, and this type of dancing was most likely influenced by the corrupt Greek influences. If you'll remember back, I believe we discussed this in Life of Christ. When you had that class last year, we did talk about how she asked for the head of John. We discussed that briefly in that one. Now, that was during the time of the Greek influence where she got the idea and the notion to dance like that. Next, dipping into the dish and giving the sop. So the Oriental customs of eating must be kept in mind. Remember, it was very common. They didn't have individual dishes that each person ate out of. They had one collective dish, one main dish that everybody ate out of. So now you can understand the meaning of the words, especially during the Last Supper, where Jesus said, "Verily I say unto you, one of you which eateth with me shall betray me." And they began to be sorrowful and say unto him one by one, "Is it I?" And another said, "Is it I?" And he answered and said unto them, "It is one of the 12 that dippeth with me in the dish." So some have supposed that Judas was in the position where he would have been dipping at the same time with Jesus into the dish, and that way he would have been singled out as the betrayer. However, this could hardly be, since the other disciples did not discover who the betrayer was at this time. They still were asking, "Is it me? Is it me?" Since they all had been eating from the same large dish, these words of Jesus, "He that dippeth with me in the dish," did not identify any one of them. All of them, as well as Judas, had been dipping in the dish with Jesus. Jesus was simply informing them that one of them, now eating with him, would be his betrayer. He was letting them know that my betrayer is here in the room and he is sharing a meal with us. Now, Christ also gives the sop to Judas. And that is something very important there, because the word sop translate into the best part. It's like the most tastiest part of the meal, the most decadent piece of meat or whatever it was that they were eating at the time. If it was maybe a rare vegetable or a rare spice or something that they were able to gather for this meal. Probably most likely it was some type of meat that was very tasty, probably hard to come by. And if you look there on page 26, he then lying on Jesus' breast said unto him, "Lord, who is it?" And Jesus answered, "He it is to whom I shall give a sop when I have dipped it." And when he had dipped the sop, he gave it to Judas Iscariot. That's found in John 13:25 and 26. Again, the sop is the tastiest morsel of food that is being served at the feast. Most often, it is picked up by the host and is given directly to one of the guests. So he had chosen the best part to give to Judas. So why would someone want to give that to their guests? Why wouldn't they want to save it or, share it around? It is them a mark of special respect for the master of the feast to hand to a guest a portion of what is before him, or to insist on putting morsels of sop into his mouth with his own hand. So the sop was the most choice morsel, the most awesome, best tasting, the one that everybody in the whole group would be just, "Oh, please, I wish that would be my piece. I wish I could have that portion." The best piece of all was the most desired part. So what that means is, the meaning of what Christ did is he most certainly was able to extend his love and friendship to the very one who would betray him. And then it described there below, "Judas, my disciple, I have infinite pity for you. You have proved false. You have forsaken me in your heart, but I will not treat you as an enemy, for I have come not to destroy, but to fulfill. Here is my sop of friendship, and that thou doest, do quickly." Even when his enemy was sitting in the room, sitting right next to him, eating out of the same dish, Jesus still chose to give him that best part, that most desirable part, because he was saying, "You know what? I know you're going to betray me. I know this is something that has to be done. This is part of the fulfillment of my plan, and I'm still choosing you to give you the best part." You and I today, when we do things that are disappointing to the Lord, and we do them, we don't intentionally do them, but at times we do, Jesus still chooses to give us the best part of him, the best part of his healing, the best part of his deliverance, the best part of his provision, the best part of his miracles, regardless of how we are as humans, because we are frail, we are simple-minded, we are careless sometimes, we are casual sometimes, but nevertheless, Jesus says, that doesn't matter to me. What matters most is that I'm able to extend and show you a respect and love and appreciation for you, because you are mine, you are my children, I have called you, and I want you to have the best part of me. So even when your enemies would rise up against you, we've got to follow Christ's example and be willing to give them the best part, so that they would not only receive our friendship, but they would see what a great example that Jesus is to us and in our lives, so that they too would be able to experience him in their life. That's it for tonight. I know this lesson went fairly quickly, but I believe that, again, like I said last week, we are building layer upon layer, and you can see that how the things that we've learned several chapters ago have a little bit more of a understanding and more context for us the further we go into the different types of customs, the different types of eating, the feasts, the fellowship, the gathering together of everyone, and how important it is for us to make sure that we learn each step so that we can understand and become more proficient in the customs of that day, and also have a deeper understanding, a deeper context and knowledge of what the Bible has to offer and what the Lord is trying to teach us. So that is it for this evening. You guys have a fantastic night. Again, it's so good to be with you guys. I can't wait to be back in person with you. You guys have a fantastic week. God bless you and take care.